Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to introduce our speaker, Dr. Jami Dulaney. She's a plant-based cardiologist living in Port Charlotte, Florida. She's also an endurance athlete, and along with her mom and daughter, is the author of an amazing family cookbook called the Plant-Based Wellness Cookbook, which is one of my personal favorites. She also has a weekly podcast, which I have been a big fan of for many years. In recent years, her traditional medical practice has changed to a special wellness-focused practice, where she educates her patients on how they can achieve health and elimination of medicine through a healthy plant-based diet. Her focus is on preventing, even reversing lifestyle diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, vascular disease, and autoimmune disease. She teaches her patients that food is medicine. She is speaking to us today about how correct breathing and a plant-based diet can improve heart health, athletic performance, and can even have an impact on infectious diseases like COVID. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jami Dulaney.
And welcome, Dr. Dulaney.
Hi, glad to be here. Sorry I cannot be in person, or we can all not be in person, but life as it is, this is what we've got. So make the best of it and enjoy. I came across Patrick McKeown through, he is an author of a book called The Oxygen Advantage. And I came across him because of my running and how to improve running and oxygenation and things. And one thing led to another, and I found the book very interesting. And I've shared some of the breathing techniques with our members. And basically, you know, our breath, I wish I would have been, again, another thing not really taught in medical school. We're taught basic pulmonary function and how to take a breath and what to do if you're not breathing. But we really weren't educated on just how much your breathing affects your mood, your digestion, your overall day-to-day performance, your blood pressure, and a whole host of other things, and even your autoimmune function, which can control or assist in your immune response. So I'm going to go over that today, and I'm going to share my screen, and we'll go over some slides, and then if anybody wants to put a question up, perfect, and we'll answer them as we go, and certainly do Q&A at the end. So I'll see if I can share my screen now. It worked a little bit ago, so we're going to, it's gone. Okay. Right where I think it was there. Give me just a second, because for some reason my keynote went away. There we go. So let's make sure that you can see my, there we go. Okay.
Put in the chat box the website for our YouTube channel.
All right, so y'all can see my screen now. If I can get a Linda shake, Kathy, you can see it.
I can see it, Dr. Dulaney. It looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so the art of breathing. We typically, I guess I should. And so, can you see my picture to the right at all? So you can. You can't see me.
We can see you, and we can also see your screen.
All right, perfect. Because if you can see me, that's what I kind of, I'm going to have to kind of go back and forth to kind of demonstrate this. But, typically when people talk about taking a breath in, and I say, in the office, take a big breath in, people go, and their shoulders will come up and their neck muscles will come up, and they'll take this giant breath in, if the doctor tells you take a few big breaths. But the reality of it is, if you're breathing correctly, we shouldn't even see you breathe. It should be so nice and easy and slow in and out and a little bit of a pause that you shouldn't really notice anybody breathing. And, it's funny, once I started looking into this topic a little bit more, in the elevator, you start watching people. You shouldn't hear anybody breathe either. So if you're in the elevator, you're in a crowded room and you hear the person breathing next to you, they're not breathing correctly. So the first thing when we talk about breathing, obviously it starts with your nose. Now you can breathe through your mouth or you can breathe through your nose, but typically we're meant to eat with our mouth. and breathe with our nose. And so when we start to breathe in or sniff in through our nose, it actually causes the release of nitric oxide. And many of you know nitric oxide is something that causes the endothelial cells to actually dilate. So when we take a breath in through our nose, we actually generate nitric oxide to actually make our bronchial tree dilate. So right then and there, that actually improves respiration and blood flow and oxygen by breathing through your nose instead of your mouth. Now, the problem is that when you breathe through your nose, if I look to the side, it's a distance, so 3 or 4 different inches from my nose to my mouth. So, and it's obviously breathing through my sinuses. So it takes more effort. If I breathe through your mouth, that's why when you start to run or exert yourself, all of a sudden you breathe through your mouth, because it's easier to get that breath in than to breathe in through the nose. And sometimes we can become very lazy. Sometimes people actually have some mechanical changes in their jawline, that their tongue actually hangs to the bottom of their mouth as opposed to resting behind your upper teeth. And so that weight of the jaw or that excessive breathing from the mouth over years ends up causing a jaw drop to people, and they don't breathe through their nose. And so again, use it or lose it. People say, well, I can't breathe through my nose because I have a deviated septum, or my nose is already stopped up. Well, part of that is because you're not using it, so it closes down. If you're not using it, it's like the back room or a back closet, it's shut off from the rest. It gets cold. You're not using it. So breathing through your nose actually takes practice, and it takes a little bit more effort, and it uses more muscles of your chest. And that's the other thing that people don't do. So most people breathe very shallowly and very often, and overbreathe, so to speak. So you'll see people breathing just from the upper portion of their chest, and they never actually use all this lung that goes down to our diaphragm. So they're just breathing in and out, these tiny little in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And you can maintain your oxygen saturation just fine. But what happens is, by breathing very frequently, we start to breathe off carbon dioxide. And by breathing off carbon dioxide, then it changes our whole physiology. And we'll get into that more and more as we go. So what we want to do is start to use respiratory muscles, and the main one being the diaphragm. So the diaphragm sits right at the bottom of your rib cage. I'm going to show you a picture of it. And so when you initiate breathing from your rib cage or your diaphragm, then all of a sudden you're pulling down and drawing air in, as opposed to just breathing on the top. The other respiratory muscles are the muscles between our ribs. And then and then the secondary muscles are these neck muscles that we use, when people get really tired. So if you see somebody at the end of a race, or somebody that's in respiratory distress because of heart failure, they're using these top muscles because they've actually worn out the muscles between the ribs, and largely because they haven't used them. So if we look at the picture, you can see the nasal cavity and the sinuses, and you can see where, that's where the cilia is. We also have, there's actually antiviral, antimicrobial substances produced. So when you breathe through your nose, you're actually filtering the air, which is much more safe than just breathing in bugs through your mouth. It's like when you ride a motorcycle, you're supposed to keep your mouth closed, right? So you don't take the big bugs in. Well, you're taking the little bugs in too if you have your mouth open. So by breathing through your nose, you can see again, if we went to COVID real quick, every conversation goes to COVID these days, but if there's a much littler area if you're breathing through your nose for that virus to come in. So it has to kind of come up, in, over, and down to get into your system, as opposed to, just into your mouth, like, this big, a whale catching little fish as it's going along. We go on down to the pharynx and the larynx. That's in the trachea, where it goes to our lungs, and the diaphragm sits on the bottom. Now, what's not shown in this picture is in the back part. I guess I can't use my pointer, but in the very back of that picture in the diaphragm, you'll see the muscles kind of split, and there's 2 little straight lines that come down. That actually extends down the spine and connects to the pelvic floor. So when you take a breath in using your diaphragm, people get confused. The diaphragm goes down when you take a breath in, not up. So it goes down and it's actually pulling the lungs like it's stretching a balloon so that the air can be drawn in. And then while it's pushing down, it also pushes down on your pelvic floor. And then when you exhale, the diaphragm comes up and helps you to expel the air from your lungs, and the pelvic floor comes up and moves. So just as an aside, when people don't use their diaphragm to breathe, then they're also not moving their pelvic floor very much. And when the pelvic floor becomes stagnant over time, then that muscle becomes weak too, and it becomes stiff because it's not been contracting and relaxing. We think about, when we strength train, we want to make everything stiff and strong and contracted. But we also have to remember that we want to have a relaxation phase of things. So we have to be able to contract and relax all of our muscles. So when you can't do that in the pelvic floor, it leads to things like incontinence and bowel dysmotility and so forth. So, everybody's been told Kegel exercises and things like that, but that's, those are sphincter muscles, but it doesn't control the big muscles that really hold all our organs in our pelvis. So breathing from your diaphragm is actually very important, not only for lung function, but for GI and GU function as well, gastrointestinal, gastro and genitourinary function. So if we look at a side shot here, you can see the diaphragm, how it kind of goes down and it pushes into the pelvis when the diaphragm goes down and comes up. So everything is connected and related, when we breathe. The diaphragm is, it's innervated, the motor and the sensory by the phrenic nerve, but most importantly, the vagus nerve that comes from the brain stem is our autonomic nerve that controls our digestive, our parasympathetic and sympathetic function, and basically from the neck down to the pelvic floor. Depending on how we breathe is going to be the stimulation of this vagus nerve, whether we're relaxing or contracting and so forth. So if we look at it on this autonomic nervous system, which the vagus nerve is the nerve that's really supplying that area. When we think about a sympathetic nerve, there's I think about it as a string. So on one end of the string, we have the sympathetic system, and on the other end of the string, we have the parasympathetic system. And we should be able to go along this string in our day-to-day lives. So if, you see a rattlesnake when you walk outside your front door, you want to run the other direction. So your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up. We shunt blood away from our digestive system. If you get an infection, you get a fever. The inflammatory response is stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate goes up when you have a fever. Typically, your blood pressure will go up if you have a fever. Again, you don't have an appetite because you have less blood flow going to your digestive system. So that's why, inflammation, people lose their appetite when they're sick. On the other hand, if everything is really good and you're nice and relaxed and we're activating the parasympathetic nervous system, our heart rate goes down, our blood pressure goes down, inflammation goes down, we're digesting better. So, you can eat, people that say, oh, I got all worked up and I ate and I got sick at my stomach, right? That's because their sympathetic system, they didn't have any blood flow to their stomach. If I'm running a marathon, I can't eat a pizza because I'm not having a lot of blood flow to my stomach because my sympathetic system is activated more and I'm shunting blood away from my digestive tract. So depending on how we breathe, we also can activate these autonomic nervous system. So when we look at high blood pressure, for starters, the reason why people get high blood pressure, again, in school we'll call people say essential hypertension, meaning we don't know what causes it, but we do have a pretty good clue to all the different things that can cause high blood pressure. Vascular, meaning over time, if there is abnormal blood vessels, we get plaque in the blood vessels get hard, they don't relax, lack of nitric oxide, that causes the blood vessels to contract, leading to high blood pressure. If we have a damage to our kidneys or poor blood flow to our kidneys, the kidneys secrete hormones to turn on retention of water, retention of salt, because they want more blood flow towards them, which results in higher blood pressure, because you're taking that, if you think about a fire hose and filling it full of water and making it very taut, the pressure in the hose would go up as opposed to being very relaxed. Salt obviously will cause the retention of water. So if you eat a high salt diet, your body, you can't turn your blood to salt water, so you have to retain water to dilute it out so that you have the appropriate viscosity of your blood. But salt's also a direct toxin to the blood vessel wall, so it becomes more stiff, so it can't dilate and constrict. Again, our whole body, if you think about a little kid, everything's so pliable. They bend, the blood vessels, everything is very rubbery and taut. As we get older, everything stiffens up, so we want to have a lot of movement to be able to dilate our blood vessels and constrict our blood vessels. And then the last etiology of high blood pressure is the autonomic influence. So when people say, well, I have white coat hypertension, they blame the doctor. Well, you may blame my white coat, but it's actually your autonomic nervous system that is firing when you see my white coat, or you think you have to go to the doctor's office, that triggers this sympathetic outpouring that causes the constriction, the higher heart rate, the higher blood pressure. So when you get nervous before or fired up, so some people, my heritage is, my ethnic heritage is Italian and Irish, so it's like the perfect storm combination, right? But in reality, my mother's very, very fiery, very sympathetically driven. And my father was actually more parasympathetic, very calm, cool, and relaxed kind of guy. Depending on your personality and your life experiences, a stock trader may be sitting up in that sympathetic tone most of their lives. So we start to drift to one end of this sympathetic, parasympathetic scale, and before long we lose gears. We lose our ability to get all the way parasympathetic or all the way sympathetic, where and most people live up in this high sympathetic tone. We have increased screen time, people worry, there's always some stimulation, there's just never quiet. As some of I was in Houston for the weekend with the ice storm, and we were without power for 40 hours. And when the power goes out, and we didn't have cell service, so we lost all of those conveniences that we looked. And there for a little bit, all we did was look at our phones, waiting to find some sort of feedback on what was actually happening. And you watch that little wheel grind and grind and grind, and nothing was happening. And finally, it's like, you might as well the only thing we're doing is wearing down a battery to something that's not working. So there we are, in this very quiet house, all of a sudden, what do? No TV, no internet, no communication. And so all of a sudden, you realize just how much input you're getting all the time. And, it took a while for, everybody to just kind of settle down and, relax into the moment. And, it comes again from where people live. Do they live more sympathetic, or do they live more parasympathetic? And, how easily can you turn on and turn off? So how we breathe also affects all of these different things. So the carbon dioxide, and we talked about a little bit before, when you take a breath in, you're drawing in oxygen. And when you exhale, you're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. If you were to take, one of these little pulse oximeters that a doctor may have put on your finger at one point and look at it, you can look at your oxygen saturation. And if you have a normal hemoglobin, a normal blood count, which most people do, the oxygen is almost always 97, 98% saturated, unless you have severe lung dysfunction. Everybody sitting at rest, their oxygen saturation, the amount of oxygen on the hemoglobin molecule is 97, 98, 99, 100%. It's always above 90%. So we can't, it's almost to the max. You get as much oxygen on there on that hemoglobin molecule as you possibly can. So that hemoglobin molecule is in your bloodstream and it's going to all your tissues. And the idea is that you want to release the oxygen to your tissues so it can be used for metabolism and use oxygen for all kinds of things that require oxygen to keep us alive. And then the byproducts of these functions generate carbon dioxide, which grabs onto the hemoglobin molecule and it's taken and expired into the lungs. So in the lungs, the arteries and the veins meet the bronchial tubes so that there is an exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Well, what people really don't understand is if you're breathing off, it needs to be balanced. And I'll show you a picture. But if you're breathing very rapidly, you don't get any more oxygen onto your hemoglobin. But you are breathing off more carbon dioxide than you should, which causes the oxygen to get stuck to the hemoglobin and you can't actually deliver it to your tissues. So if you don't get oxygen to your tissues, then that basically turns on the sympathetic nervous system to say, hey, we got a problem. We're low oxygen here. We need to increase the heart rate. We need to increase the blood pressure so we can get more oxygen to our tissues. And then, so now you're breathing faster, but you're breathing ineffectively, blowing off carbon dioxide, and the oxygen is still not getting to the tissues. The other thing that happens when you don't get oxygen to your tissues is that we change metabolism. So we change from metabolizing fat to metabolizing carbon dioxide. So if I were going to run a 100-meter dash, I would burn just the amount of energy that I had produced in a very short time from burning carbohydrate. So it's a very quick burst of energy, but it's not, we don't have that much of it. So you have to, there's no oxygen involved in producing energy from carbohydrate. It's just this quick burst of energy and it's gone. We store calories in our muscles in the form of carbohydrate, glycogen, and glucose, but to access it and turn it into energy, just like if you would turn oil into electric or coal into electric, it takes a process, and that process doesn't use oxygen if we're using glucose, if we're using burning glucose, but if we want to burn fat, we need oxygen. So if you're not delivering oxygen to your tissues, then we start burning mainly glucose or carbohydrate. It's like, well, that's okay, because I have 2,000 calories of carbohydrate stored in my muscle and about 200 calories of carbohydrate stored in my liver. But if I'm somebody that wants to lose weight, I'm kind of just burning off the top, so to speak. So you're just, burning the very top layer. So what you take in, you're kind of burning off. You're never getting into the fat stores because it takes more oxygen to get into the fat stores. When I'm running in a marathon, if I go through all that carbohydrate that I have access to, then I have to slow down and get my heart rate down and get that oxygen to be delivered in order to get to my fat stores. So that actually changes our metabolism. The other thing is, again, if I am breathing really fast and generating that and stimulating that sympathetic tone, then I'm increasing the risk of infection because I'm my immune system is being overstimulated. And then, we talk about mental health. If you're always up there, redlining, then that can, lead to an anxiety type level. So we're already almost up there. It's like that cat on a hot tin roof, or the guy that just needs a little bit of firing really quickly to get things going. Am I getting any feedback here?
We do have a couple of quick questions. Okay. What about people who need that have, for physical reasons, whether it be heart conditions or lung conditions or whatever, naturally have shortness of breath. Like they have a hard time breathing. Is there
Right.
exercises that they can do?
Absolutely. So we're going to kind of get to that. We've kind of looked over this balancing is called the Bohr effect. Obviously that didn't load for some reason.
And
But
then another question is, what about, how does it affect your breathing for people who use a Neti Pot?
Okay. So let's hit the people that have chronic lung conditions first. So some people have asthma, and when you have asthma, there's a spasm of the bronchial tree. So when you try to breathe out, you kind of trap air, and so they can't get the air out. And so they're told to purse their lips and keep blowing, blowing, blowing in a steady stream out to get the air out. There are people that have had lung damage so that they just don't oxygenate as well because they can't get the oxygen over the scar tissue. And so they need to breathe more, perhaps. But when we go back to that, and I don't know that any of these, go back here, got to my last slide first there. So my pictures didn't come across for some reason on this computer. When we look at most people that have either lung disease or heart disease, they're breathing incorrectly with very little bit of their lungs. If somebody's morbidly obese, you can think about the weight of the adipose on their chest that makes it difficult to expand the chest. When people get old and they have muscle loss, they can't expand their chest and they don't breathe right. So you see that all this neck muscle. So anybody can be retrained to actually take the appropriate breath, starting with the diaphragm. So that can all, no matter what age, people can actually improve their diaphragmatic breathing, their oxygen exchange, the amount of lungs, the tissue that they actually use, and actually improve all of those. But it starts, and then you said a neti pot. So a neti pot, basically, you're just sniffing in humidified air, so more moist air coming in to theoretically, you could put if people put, I don't know, whatever in it to make, whether it's peppermint or some essential oil to open up the nasal passages a little bit. You're basically making more moist air and maybe opening up those passages a little bit more. Frankly, they don't do a lot. It symptomatically may make you feel better. Peppermint oil kind of causes a dilatation a little bit, so that can be helpful. That's why people used to put Vicks. Please don't use Vicks. There's been actually a lot of oil and abscesses in lungs for people actually trying to stick Vicks up their nose, and then they actually aspirate it into their lungs, and it can cause abscesses in the lungs. But, if you have some peppermint oil somewhere, you can actually, just a little bit onto your nose, or if you're the neti pot a little bit, it can open up those bronchial tubes a little bit, and you can get a little bit more oxygen in. But if you're not breathing correctly, you can put all that in that you want, and it doesn't get you're still not delivering the oxygen like you should. If we go to someone that has a CPAP mask, and a CPAP mask basically pressurizes air into people's lungs when they stop breathing. And they usually stop breathing because for some reason they become obstructed over time, and they lose their sensitivity to carbon dioxide, and so they don't breathe. So that forces air into their lungs. So it's a mechanical expansion of the lungs when they're not breathing. But forcing air in is different than negatively sucking air in. So our chest cavities are made to create a negative pressure to suck air in. If we're positively pushing air in, we actually impair our blood flow to some degree and cardiac function. And it's probably a little bit more complicated than we want to get into in this 30-minute discussion. But the idea is to breathe as good as you can and as effectively as you can to maximize your oxygenation. So one of the things to do is, if you haven't ever experienced this, so if I turn to the side, and Kathy, can you see me sitting to the side?
We sure can.
Maybe I should I should stop sharing my screen for just a second and get me full. So if I sit to the side and I put my hand on my back, if I'm taking a good diaphragmatic breath, my hand should go out, not up. So it shouldn't slide up, it should go out. So I'm actually expanding my chest cavity, not sucking it up. So I'm not stretching myself up, but making myself wider by expanding my ribs in my lung capacity. And you can lay on your back and feel your hand go up when you take a breath in. You can feel, I'll tell people in the office, breathe into my hand. So I'll put my hand on their back, or have them put their hand on their back and see whether or not they can feel their hand go out, or their hand doesn't move, or it slides up. So that's one way to start. And of course, I should have started from the very beginning to breathe through your nose.
So in the breathing through your nose, is that inhaling and exhaling both?
Yes. Yes. So a lot of people were taught breathe, breathe in and out, but you really want to use those muscles both in and out to effectively train your muscles. Obviously, the reason why you would open your mouth to get the air out, you can get it out quicker, correct? Mm-hmm. It's harder to get it out. The other thing we want is this very slow inspiration. So if you can just imagine something, like you've seen I think it's Jacqueline Larson sends those cards that, people have got those email cards that this plant kind of grows up like this. You want to think your lungs expanding from the bottom up, 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 until the last part that you actually feel expand is you can actually feel your lungs filling up into this top part of your neck. And then the exhale is just a nice, easy exhale, 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 exhale. And then there's this little pause as you're down, and then start back up. So instead of having a big curve up and down, so most people breathe about 18 to 20 times a minute. We really should breathe 6 to 10 times a minute. So if you can count, you can count it yourself for starters and see where you are. So that's one way to start, to see what your breathing pattern is just off the top of things. So if if you count for 15 seconds and you breathe twice, then that's going to be 4, that's 8. But for 30, but you want to do 6 to 10 for that whole 60 seconds for starters. So you want your nose to breathe in through your nose, out through your nose. And instead of being, like this giant curve up and down, it should just be this nice little flat curve that is going up and down. So not this big, deep breath in, big breath out, deep breath in, big breath out. Just this nice, steady. And one of the things you can do to test is there's a test called a BOT test, B-O-T-T. And the BOT test tells us our tolerance to carbon dioxide. So the reason why we take a breath is we don't like carbon dioxide. It's acid forming, and we want to get rid of it. And we're so used to breathing it off so rapidly that when it starts to build up at all, we want to take a breath. So if you're someone that yawns, or you find yourself sighing throughout the day, That's another way to get rid of a lot of carbon dioxide.
Interesting.
So you want to try, so if you catch yourself that, you want to kind of try to swallow it, not do the big yawn. Because because that is leading to a large amount of carbon dioxide being expelled. So this BOT test, B-O-T-T, basically we're going to take a breath in and a breath out, just a little breath in through our nose and a little breath out, a little breath in and a little breath out. And at the end of the expiration, you hit your stopwatch and you hold your breath until you feel the first urge to breathe. So it's not like you're going to try to hold it as long as you can. It's when you first feel that little flinch of your diaphragm, and you'll feel it, that you want to take a breath. Then you take a breath and you note how many seconds that is. And that will tell you how tolerant you are of carbon dioxide. So ideally, the best is 40. The worst is 10 or less. Most people come in somewhere around 20 when they first start. You can't cheat. You don't want to take in a deep breath in and blow it all the way out, because then you're blowing off carbon dioxide. So if you blow off a bunch of carbon dioxide, then obviously you'll be able to hold your breath longer. So it's ideally first thing in the morning, you breath in, breath out, breath in, breath out, and then don't breathe and see what it is. And then you can do things over time to improve it. So improving it would be, one, when you're awake, keep your mouth shut when you're not eating. So, or talking. So you're breathing through your nose all the time. Notice the placement of your tongue, because if your tongue is in the roof of your mouth, then it takes the pressure off and your jaw tends to stay shut, and it's easier to keep your mouth shut. And you can even tape your mouth shut at night to see if you sleep with your mouth open. Obviously, if you wake up and your mouth is open and you snore and your mouth is all dry, chances are your mouth was open. But you can actually tape your mouth to see if you're improving. And you'll pop the tape. Don't use duct tape. You can actually buy little sensory tapes to do that. Or you can take a little piece of paper tape.
What about a Band-Aid? Could you just use a Band-Aid?
It might be a little bit forceful to take off. I guess you could, like a little tiny one, and just to see. But that, that'll certainly, would work. But it lets you know, don't put it over your husband's mustache. But that will give you an idea. The other thing so once you've identified that number and identified that, you start to think, well, geez, I'm not really tolerant of carbon dioxide much. How do we get it better? So again, you're going to start that while you're, first thing you wake up in the morning. If I'm doing a plank, I'll try to be, not only do I have the stopwatch on a plank, I'll try to see how I'll watch my breath, so I can breathe in as slow as I can and out as slow as I can to have as few breaths per minute as possible. You can do exercises where you have your stopwatch and you breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 4 seconds and in for 4 seconds and out for 4 seconds, and then bump that up. You can do a series of breath holds where you're holding your breath at end expiration. So, if you were going to jump in the water and swim to the other side, you take a big breath in and jump in the water. And one of the reasons why divers do that is if you've seen anybody do these free dives, they breathe in and breathe out and breathe in and breathe out, breathe in and breathe out. And then they take a big breath in and go. The reason why, they're blowing off as much carbon dioxide as they possibly can. They're taking in some more oxygen, but the main reason is to get that carbon dioxide down to the point where they don't have the urge to breathe. But what we're doing here in training is we don't want to get rid of the carbon dioxide. We want to learn to live with it. So we want to breathe in and breathe out and then hold our breath. So you can, yes.
Dr. Dulaney, does this also apply for weightlifting? Because typically you exhale on the exertion and then inhale, when you release. Are you saying that you should breathe through your nose and not through your mouth on the, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, as much in every activity as you can breathe through your nose, you should. One of the ways to maximize lifting ability is to actually, that slide I showed, where when you take a breath in and hold it, you're increasing your abdominal muscle contraction. So when you're lifting on a hold, everything is tight, so you're stabilizing your spine. That's one reason why power lifters take a breath in and hold, and then they exhale when they release, because they're trying to stabilize all the your core muscles when you're lifting. Most of us don't lift that heavy. We should be able to breathe in and out while we're lifting. You know what I mean? It's really not, if you're not lifting your maximum weight, it's not a necessarily thing that, you need to hold your breath either way when you're lifting.
Did that answer your question, Valerie? I guess her question was, inhaling and exhaling through the nose also apply when lifting weights. So
yeah,
I think
so any activity that you can do is going to cause, the idea is to keep that carbon dioxide in balance enough that you deliver maximum amount of oxygen to your tissues for cellular function. So we can take it as far as cancer. We can take it as far as infection. You want to deliver oxygen to your tissues. The more you hyperventilate, it's why you get dizzy when you hyperventilate, right? When you hyperventilate, you blow off all the carbon dioxide. You still have, your oxygen is still 98% saturated. So if I go, my oxygen's going to be fine, but all of a sudden I get dizzy. The reason why I get dizzy is because I blew off all the carbon dioxide and the oxygen can't get to my brain because it's stuck onto my hemoglobin molecule. So that's why they have you breathe in the bag. When you breathe in the bag and you get that carbon dioxide back, then you can release the oxygen to your head and you're not dizzy anymore. Same way with your blood pressure. When I'm breathing in and out, I deliver oxygen to my tissues, then I'm going to go from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic shift. My blood pressure, my heart rate's going to come down. So if you're breathing really shallowly all day long and very frequently, you're blowing off carbon dioxide, you can't deliver oxygen to your tissues, and everything has to work harder.
One other thing that I remember reading in one of the books that you recommended was that if you didn't breathe deep enough, so that meant your diaphragm had to be involved, the air did not get to your lower lung lobes. And talk about that, would you?
Right, because so if we're not fully expanding, so when people just breathe say this top third of our lungs, and they don't expand, down into the bottom part of my lungs, then they just kind of sit there, like an old sponge, so it's moist and damp and wet, and they're just down there collapsed. They never open up. And so just like, anything else that you tried to open up after, a piece of plastic that's been all crinkled for a while, that, it doesn't want to open up, it's still moist and wet. So if you inhale bacteria or viruses, it's going down there and it can just start to ferment and cause a pneumonia, because we're never really expanding that lung. It's just this petri dish to grow things. Mm. The other thing that happens, if I were to get a pneumonia, if I were to get COVID, and people have probably seen some of the pictures where their lungs get very, very wet with basically an inflammatory reaction. And so when your lungs are wet, whether it's an infection or it's heart failure, again, you can't, think about a honeycomb. When it's wet, it's soggy and it's going to collapse, or a sponge. It collapses when it's wet. You'd like it to be as open as you can. So when it's wet, it's like an old wet blanket. It's heavy, and it takes more effort to try to get it up, to get them open. So if you have somebody that's just been breathing on the top part of their lungs all the time, and then they get sick, then they don't have the muscle strength to really open those, sticky lungs up in the first place, and they wear out quicker. And then that's what causes respiratory failure in one thing. So when somebody breaks, it's like, how do you die? You break your hip and you get pneumonia, right?
Mhm.
That's one way that people die when they get, 90 years old. They trip over, they break their hip, they get a pneumonia. It's like, why do you get a pneumonia when you break your hip? Well, you break your hip, you got to go to surgery. So all of a sudden they put you on a ventilator and they're blowing oxygen in. Instead of expanding their lungs, they're just blowing enough in to saturate. Doesn't take a lot, right? They're blowing in from the outside, so you have outside contamination. And then when they take the breathing tube out after surgery's done, nobody's breathing. So they're just doing this very minimal breath. And all the bacteria can take over and cause a pneumonia. And then they don't have enough musculature because they become weak to actually expand their lungs. And then they go into respiratory failure.
Is that why they have you do the lung exercises after surgery where you have to blow into the thing and suck at it and get the little balls up there in the air?
Right, because you're trying
That's
to,
through your mouth.
yes, you're trying to actually improve lung function. So it's very important if it's you or somebody has one of those machines, like do this all the time. And if you have one from a previous surgery, that's a great exercise.
But you're doing it through your mouth. You're breathing in and out through your mouth.
You are breathing through your mouth, but in order to get that, you are losing your lungs. So, I mean, ideally, you like to do your nose, but you can get an idea of how much lung function you have by doing that. The other poor man's pulmonary function test is a balloon.
Mm-hmm.
So you take a balloon, and you get it all stretched out, and you see how big you can blow the balloon up. If you can't get that balloon blown up, then chances are you're not generating the force that you should be able to generate. So that's another, like I said, poor man's pulmonary function test. I think I did it to Kathy.
We had a couple of questions here. One was, first of all, thank you for reminding, Laura said, to get back into yoga and meditation again. You would recommend that that's one thing we do, correct? That we would think about?
Absolutely. Making sure that, because the most yogi diaphragmatic breathing is just that, making sure that you're generating, you're moving your diaphragm, and part of the meditation is to get your heart rate down, your blood pressure down, but it's mainly through breathing and allowing that carbon dioxide to accumulate and letting everything relax.
Okay. And then we had someone who, let me see, this was Veronica, and she was asking about the Corona mask. I wonder if she's talking about a COVID mask. That might be it. That she always feels like she suffocates in it.
I don't know what a Corona mask is.
Okay.
The mask. Everybody's having to wear these masks now to prevent getting COVID.
Oh, they're like the N95 mask or the very
Yeah.
obstructive mask. I got you. Well, okay. So, everybody, anybody that's, first of all, if you put a mask on and you breathe out, air comes out. And just like when you're breathing, if I was going to breathe COVID in and I breathe it in my mouth, obviously it's a really direct track, right? So if I'm breathing through my mouth, I always want to tell people, scream, close your mouth, close your mouth. If I didn't have a mask on and I have my mouth closed, then viruses have to come up my nose, in and down. So just breathing through my nose is protecting me more than breathing through my mouth. Now, if I put a mask on and the mask is obstructing me to the point where I'm breathing through my mouth because I can't breathe through my nose because I don't feel like I'm getting enough air, and all of a sudden I'm doing this all the time because I have my mouth open. When that mask gets wet, especially if it's a cloth mask and you're starting to take things in, you're decreasing the effectiveness of the mask. So the best protection is you're breathing through your nose and you have and completely seals. That would be the best protection of not getting something in. People say, well, there have been things out there, your oxygen saturation goes down if you wear a mask. No, it doesn't. You can watch all day long and you get, because I told you in the beginning, Doesn't take much to get 97, 98% saturated. The people with the weakest lungs can get saturated. What happens and why we get short of breath with the mask is that we start retaining CO2 because it's right there. It's like having your head in the bag. So now you're retaining you've got all the CO2 that you're blowing in and out, and it becomes uncomfortable. And then people start hyperventilating. And when they hyperventilate, they're blowing off more CO2. But again, the more they hyperventilate, it's here, they start to get the oxygen that's clinging to, the hemoglobin. So they're not delivering the oxygen that they should to their tissue. So even though their oxygen saturation doesn't drop, if you hyperventilate, you don't deliver the oxygen to your tissues and you feel bad. So you get a headache, or you're stuffy, or all those, you're uncomfortable, you're short of breath. It's because of the CO2 that's causing that issue. So breathing correctly, you should be able to breathe in a mask, but we're not used to that obstruction.
It causes me to get a cough. If I have to wear one for longer than running into the grocery store to pick up some potatoes, I feel like I'm going to cough constantly.
Well, and because you probably end up with your mouth open, you have saliva, you have, retention of the fluids and the humidity and things like that. So it's actually generating, a bit of a cough, like you have postnasal drip.
That's probably true.
Yeah, they're not, I mean, they weren't, they really weren't made. We were supposed to be able to take things in and out. And the idea actually is to be able to have some exposure to good microbes as well as bad. So we actually are doing somewhat of a selection of our microbes when we do this that are basically in the mask, which may not be the ones we necessarily want to breathe in and breathe out all the time.
True.
Yeah. One other thing that is always of interest to us, and that's nitric oxide. And you briefly mentioned that at the beginning about nose and nitric oxide. Also, what about humming songs and things like that? Anything you can add to that?
Well, the nitric oxide, again, is going to dilate mainly your pulmonary vasculature, which increase blood flow. So nitric oxide is a good thing any way you can get it, right? So breathing through your nose, your sinus is going to generate that nitric oxide, the little blood vessels in your nose, and everything's going to dilate. So even if people say they have chronic nasal drip or one side of their nose is blocked, if they start breathing this way, the first thing that happens is their nose starts to run crazy. So if you go out and you're doing this on your morning walk, you'll notice that your nose is just running like crazy, like more than it ever did. And that's mainly because you're starting to generate more nitric oxide and your nose is starting to open up. And over time, that will stop. You won't have the runny nose that you did early on. And humming, well, if you're humming, your mouth is shut. So you're humming and you're breathing through your nose. So that's, that's probably, a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we have one here. This is from Rich from Fitness. He says, when running, I don't seem to be able to get a full breath through my nose. Out is no problem. If I practice enough, and maybe you can review how to practice that, will my pathways eventually grow larger to allow this, or is this just the way it's going to be?
Right. So what happens is you have to develop the musculature just like any other muscle to breathe in effectively. So the first thing that needs to happen is you need to slow your pace down. So when I first started trying to do this, I would do it on my, my recovery runs or my easy runs, or even doing the walk. If you do a run walk method, the walk breaks. So you're developing the musculature to be able to increase that respiration. So eventually, but if you go fast enough, you can't get enough air. So if you're running full out or you're running hard and you start generating lactic acid in your muscles, then your pH is going to drop and you need to blow that off via carbon dioxide. So it makes it impossible at some point. You've got to get the carbon dioxide off because you're affecting your pH to a point where you're decreasing performance. So if you watch a sprinter, they're not going to be breathing through their nose. They're going to be breathing through any way they possibly can to get rid of the acid that they can, blow off carbon dioxide. The shorter the race, the more carbohydrates you're burning, the more you have to blow off lactic acid, the more lactic acid you're generating. On the other hand, if you're running a long, slow run, or you're running a marathon, you like your heart rate to be low enough that you can breathe through your nose, and then you're burning more fat. You need less carbohydrates, and actually you run better with the lower heart rate. So if I were to do a stress test on someone, the idea of a stress test is to get them up to a maximum heart rate and see how their heart performs at a maximum heart rate. They can't sustain that for very long. And I can always tell when people are getting to that lactic acid threshold before they can, because I'll see a jump in their heart rate and I'll see a jump in their respirations. And it's not very much longer. They'll say, uncle, right? So if you're running, is Rick, I don't know if he, so if you're running really fast, you have to stop, mainly because you're acute, you can't clear the acid, you can't clear, your pH is dropping or whatever, that makes you stop. It's not because you run out of oxygen. It's because you can't clear the lactic acid and the pH. So that slows your muscle down. So the idea, if I'm going to run my best marathon, I want to keep my heart rate below a certain level that I can keep going without generating the acid to the point where I'm burning so much carbohydrate that it slows me down. Because what happens, the wall is nothing but you don't have any carbohydrate to burn. You have to slow down, let your heart rate come down enough that you can deliver oxygen to your tissue so you can burn fat. So the people that are and then people, then they twist it. Some people say it's like, well, you have to eat fat to burn fat. Well, that's not true. What you eat doesn't have anything to do with what you burn when you're exercising. It's what your heart rate is. So if you always train at a high heart rate, you're always going to burn carbohydrate preferentially. And whether or not you eat it or not, you're still going to have some glycogen stores that you can burn.
And that, I guess that loops back around to what you said earlier, that it's got to work right if you're going to burn off that fat. Like if we're trying to lose weight, we want our breath right.
Right. And so if you see somebody that's really overweight and they're breathing very shallowly, they're just burning off the carbohydrate stores. Mm-hmm. They're never getting into the fat store. So it's kind of a double whammy if somebody's breathing incorrectly.
Mm-hmm. So they might be eating really well, but they just are eating enough carbohydrates to keep them going and not getting into the other, right?
Right. You're going to burn. Right. So so if you go to sleep at night, you burn more fat than carbohydrate. You burn mainly fat once you stop. That's another reason for closing the kitchen, so to speak. Close the kitchen, everything calms down. You're go to parasympathetic, you're all nice and calm, you get improved digestion, you're burning fat. The minute you get up, your heart rate goes up, you start breathing through your mouth, you grab something, you switch off over to more carbohydrates. Your brain starts to move, your brain wants your brain's going to work on carbohydrates. So it's going to, regardless, it's going to get its carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of energy for your brain. So when you wake up and you start thinking, your brain's starting to be active again. So that switches up the carbohydrate usage, and but depending on how you're breathing, fat that the rest of your body can use.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, and that is, it just seems crazy that we shouldn't want to get rid of carbon dioxide, but we need carbon dioxide at a certain level, and
it's got to be balanced.
Yeah.
So that's the Bohr effect, and I don't know why my screen. I don't know why it didn't come across on my.
So basically, we need carbon dioxide to help us absorb oxygen.
Well, not to absorb oxygen, but to unload it.
Unload it. Okay, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
So it's got to be, if you think about a seesaw, and if you're all one way, you're not going to be able. It's got to be balanced.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Valerie was asking about blood clots in the lungs. how would this kind of thing help someone who has blood clots in their lungs?
Well, yes, because again, the question is why people get blood clots in their lungs.
Uh-huh.
So there are people that have clotting defects that, are prone to clots in their legs that can go. Most of the time, clots don't start in the lungs. They come from someplace, legs, typically pelvis, and go there. People that have cancer are more prone to clot, to develop blood clots. People that are sedentary are more developed to form blood clots. So, that clotting mechanism, and then blood flows, and so that's where it ends up at the point, wherever it goes to, it gets stuck. Basically, if a branch floats down a river, it's going to get stuck in the curve, so to speak, right? So clots move and they get stuck at the smallest endpoint if your body doesn't have time to dissolve them. If you're breathing correctly, then you're moving blood in and out, but it doesn't, just obviously if you don't breathe effectively, you're also more prone to a decrease in blood flow. Anytime flow decreases, then it clots. When your heart stops beating, the last beat, then things clot, right? You got to keep the ball rolling, so when their heart function decreases severely and there's less flow, then people are more apt to clot. When they move less, they're more apt to clot because they're not helping move the blood around. So it all goes together. But one won't necessarily fix the other.
And then can you address this whole issue of when you were talking about blood flow, oxygen and, carbon dioxide, or just the breathing in helps make it easier for our heart to beat, correct? Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
It pulls the blood into the heart.
Right. So
Yes,
it makes it easier. That negative pressure that's generated in the chest cavity improves blood flow and cardiac function. So when people are on a breathing machine and oxygen and air is blown into them, it makes their ability to get blood in the heart and out of the heart actually more difficult. So it's a compromise when we have to put people on the breathing machine. It actually hurts their heart function somewhat. Now, obviously, it's a necessary thing, so that compromise is needed. But that's why, you want to get people off of that as soon as possible. And the other thing is when people are on a breathing machine, then the machine is breathing for them and they get their lung muscles deteriorate even quicker, right? Because they're not using them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is it okay to snore? Is that a good thing, or what is snoring telling us?
Snoring is usually a sign of obstruction. So if you're on your back, the palate may drift into your throat. So it's some sort of obstruction. So the reality of it is no, you would like not to snore. There's some sort of, and when people lose weight, they actually lose weight in their tongue. They lose weight in their palate. They lose weight in their neck. And that's why weight loss can often cure sleep apnea, because they get rid of the obstruction. Plus, when you get the weight off your chest, it's easier to breathe as well.
Oh. So for CPAP users, losing weight would be a good first step. Anything else?
Absolutely. Breathing through your nose all the time.
Okay.
And diaphragmatic breathing. Most people can probably get off of a CPAP machine if they followed those things. We put people on a CPAP machine just like we put people on high blood pressure medicine and cholesterol medicine. You can change your diet and change your lifestyle and make your blood pressure and your heart and your cholesterol go down. But most people would rather keep doing what they're doing and take the pill and have a good number and feel great.
And if people wanted to learn more, what books would you recommend? Or
I think the book Oxygen Advantage, and I actually brought it so I can show.
Vicki found a new one online that he's just written.
Oh yeah.
It just came out. It just was released the 15th.
Uh-huh. I'll have to have him back on the show then, I guess.
No, we can read it. No, that's good. So that would be one you would recommend.
Yeah, that's one. The other one I like is What Doesn't Kill Us by, I believe his name is Scott Carney. I know Carney is the last name, Carney. He does a review of Wim Hof and a bunch of different, and Patrick McGowan's in that book. So he's a journalist that does a review of respiratory science that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Wim Hof, Wimhof, he's an interesting website. He is a Norwegian guy that has done a lot of work with breathing and immune function. His book is not quite as, Scott Carney does a better job explaining what he does than his book does, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of gives you the best of all worlds. But his website is pretty interesting. And a lot of people he has some exercises for people to do on breath holds and things like that that are pretty cool. You know, just like I was moaning to Kathy and Linda and Sue yesterday that I had been in Houston freezing to death over the weekend. And the reality of it is, you know, we get so used to a temperature between 75 and 80 that any change in that just makes us miserable. But the reality of it is we should be able to control a lot of those things. I mean, you know, back, 100 years ago, people did not have down jackets and all the fleece and stuff, but yet they lived, right? You know, they didn't have all the layers. And most of that was because their autonomic nervous system was so in tune that things changed that they could actually heat themselves up. And Wim Hof has some of that on his website, how you can, he walks up mountains in shorts, and barefoot and ice baths and all that kind of stuff. And, it's something I admire. It's not something that I have, achieved by any stretch of the imagination. I've tried the cold shower thing and, that kind of stuff. And, it's, there's a little bit of mind over matter that I just been cold long enough. And, it's just hard for me to get around that. Hi, Doc, what causes thyroid disease? Is that the whole question?
Yeah, I think that, or abnormalities.
Thyroid abnormalities. The thyroid is, basic metabolism burner, or, people call the main furnace that controls metabolism and a lot of endocrine function. And the reality of it is, just like diabetes, thyroid function is basically overworking of that system. So, you've just overstimulated the thermostat in most cases. Autoimmune thyroiditis means the body attacks the thyroid and destroys it. Is like any other autoimmune disease, thought to be brought on by, dairy, protein, high protein diets and things certainly contribute to it. When people first have hypothyroidism, if they catch it early and they change their diet and their metabolism, their weight, they can often reverse it somewhat. But after people have been hypothyroid or low thyroid for years and years and years, then, the thyroid is kind of scarred and they're always left taking medication. Just like if you burn out the pancreas, then people are left taking medications.
Dr. Dulaney.
Yes.
Every year you have a fabulous conference, and I've been waiting to hear what you're doing this year. And also, are you going to be having the meetings with you and your daughter the day before, like you have in the past?
So because of COVID and the decreased number of people we can have, we're postponing our yearly conference until January. And I believe it's the last week in January is the tentative date at this point. But what we have done, what we did in January, we did a Healthy January where Addie and I did a Zoom conference where we made 2 breakfasts, 2 lunch, 2 dinner, and talked about the nutritional value of it, and did a question and answer, and then put that up for people to view for a week afterwards and do a Q&A. We're going to do another one of those in March 25th, and we're going to do it on how to make sourdough bread from beginning to the end, and we're going to do it on fermentation and talk about fermentation in the gut microbiome. So Addie will be making a tempeh Reuben sandwich, and we're going to go back and forth and discuss again, fermentation, how it affects our microbes, how it affects our immune system, our health. And I think what we will do, we talked yesterday, but it's a good idea. If somebody wants to have, and that's on a Wednesday or Thursday night from 5:30 to 8. And we'll be putting a link up on drdulaney.com to get tickets for that. I think we did $25 for a ticket for that, and you could have it for a week. But if people want to do the day before that or the week before that, if somebody wanted to do a conference, I think we'll make it available that they could do a one-time conference with one of us or the other of us in anticipation and then we can include that meeting into that. Sure. So we'll put links to that up on the website on how to do that.
Well, March is going to be a good month. We're looking forward to that. And we also have an event. I think y'all saw that at the beginning. Debbie, will you tell them about what the Polk Wellness professionals are going to be doing in March?
Yes, Kathy, thank you for that opportunity. Y'all may recall last year that we had the Spring into Health speaker series, and Dr. Greger was supposed to be here on March 25th of last year. Well, we were not able to get him down here, of course, because of COVID. And we had the opportunity to do a question and answer with him over the summer. And we recorded that Q&A. Kathy was on that call along with Rich Wills from Fit Niche, one of our sponsors. I was on the call, and also Liz Antalia from Polk Wellness Professionals too. So anyway, we did a Q&A. We asked everybody, the 559 people who had registered to see Dr. Greger, we asked them to give us questions to ask Dr. Greger. So we're going to be viewing this. We are going to have a panel. Kathy will be on that panel. We will also have Rich, myself, and then we're going to have a plant-based dietitian who will answer your questions. So our goal is to answer the questions that y'all may have about plant-based nutrition. Maybe some of the ones that Dr. Greger did not answer because we only had a half an hour, but that's going to be on March 19th. That's a Friday. And so basically about a month from tomorrow. And it's going to be from 11:30 to 1 o'clock. And we'll be sending out notices. I'll be giving Kathy information to send out to all of the chat and Chew people. And the good news is there's going to be some surprises sponsored by Fit Niche. So you do want to register early. That's all I can say. Okay, but thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Dr. Dulaney, will you'll be sending out the link also to your workshop, so we can put that in our email as well.
Yeah, we'll send you that, and then anybody who wants to come down to Punta Gorda on the 28th on Sunday, there's a Veg Fest down here. So if you want to take a road trip down to Punta Gorda and hang out, there'll be, I don't know, I'll be speaking. I'm not, you can do Veg Fest Punta Gorda. There's a Facebook post group out there. Maybe I can send you the link if you can't find it, Kathy, and it'll tell you the lineup of speakers perhaps.
Okay. And I think somebody asked about iodine for thyroid. I think that's our last question. I must have missed that.
The problem with iodine is that you need enough, but not too much.
Okay.
And there's no way to measure an iodine level without doing urine collection. So I tell people to use a little dulse flakes or kelp flakes in food, or a little nori, and that usually gets people where they're going. We have had people that are very strict and don't use any iodinized salt at all, or not exposed to it. And they have been, you know, we've done the nori and the dulse flakes, and their thyroid function has got better. So if, you know, if you're, but most of the time we're all exposed to a little iodinized salt along the way somewhere. And again, in the, you know, so it just, if you eat anything, if you eat out, you're typically exposed to it somewhere.
Okay, and my last question was, would you tell them what you like to have at dinner every night for dessert? So we can make this too, because it sounds so easy.
So I have a mason glass jar that's about the size of my coffee cup. And in the bottom third of it, I chop up a frozen banana. And then I actually put a tablespoon of cacao powder. And then I fill the rest of it up with the fruit of choice. So whether it's frozen blueberries, frozen cherries, I fill it up and I actually smash it down till I can get much fruit in as I can. And then I put soy milk to about halfway up. And I sit there with my spoon and I make soft serve. And so it's poor man's soft serve without having to use a blender. Because I used to do it in the blender and then I had to clean out the blender at night. So it's like, well, what if I just did it in the jar and I didn't have to, and it works just fine. So
I have a personal question.
yes.
Are you sitting on an exercise ball?
Yes. Am I bouncing too much?
No, but I think it's great. I had the feeling that's what you were doing.
You know, when I spent a month in Houston with Addie before she delivered, she called it her pregnancy ball. And so when she was in the hospital, I was doing my calls at her desk and I was sitting on this thing, and it's like, you know, this is pretty comfortable. And, you know, after I run in the morning and everything, I'm always kind of tight. So I can fidget around on this thing and stretch and do all kinds of things when sometimes nobody's looking. Other times I get caught and say, you know, are you on an exercise ball? And it's like, oh, I must have been bouncing too much. But yeah, it's
that's like Gregor on his treadmill. He does all of his interviews on a treadmill. So
yeah, so it's kind of just gives me a different way. And I mean, you can do all kinds of things. You know, I don't know if anybody knows Katie Bowman and have read her books. She would actually be a good person to get on your pod thing if you could, Chat and Chew. But, you know, she talks about functional fitness and movement and exercise. And, you know, when we're at it, you know, so you can get up and do a squat. And if you don't have a chair to throw back, you can do a lot of different things on one of these balls, you know, to get a little movement in, a couple squats or, you know, do some stretches or whatever on it. So.
Cool.
Hey, and Linda, will you close out our meeting for us?
You bet. Thank you so much, Dr. Dulaney. It was an excellent presentation. And if you look at the chat box, you can see just how much people have gotten from the information that you shared. What's interesting is that we, something that we do so automatically and effortlessly, with just a little tweak, we can do it better. So from all of us at Chat and Chew, thank you so very much. Good job. Well done.
Thank you. Appreciate it.